All right, guys, back to the opium trade. Now, if you remember, there's a huge trade imbalance with China and the British and the British East India Company, which the government eventually takes over, uh, has to smooth out that trade imbalance, and they do so with opium. Now, opium is a very addictive drug, and the Chinese don't really like it a whole heck of a lot. So, where does opium grow? Well, same place as it does today. What then was northern India, which today is present day Afghanistan. There's an extreme amount of opium. The majority of heroin in the world that is in the world comes from that area. At the same time, because of this illicit trade, people are paying for the opium, right? And that means that bullion, silver, money, whatever it is, are going back to the British. So the British are actually making money in this, and they reverse the trade imbalance. All right, the Chinese don't like it, and they start to take action against the trade of opium. So what happens? China almost immediately outlaws the importation of opium into their country. They do this to protect people. Um, I don't think it's easy to understate the impact that opium had on China. I mean, you could walk down the street and see people hanging out smoking opium. They're incredibly affected by this drug. Okay, so they um, make the trade of opium illegal. They negotiate with the British to stop selling opium, and the British flat out refused. They said it was their right to do this, and because the Chinese people wanted it, they would deliver that product without regard to any moral consequence of it. So, what happens now? The Chinese take matters into their own hands, and they set up blockades. And if you remember, blockade simply is they prevent British ships from entering Chinese ports. The British took this as an act of war and really laid the hammer down on the Chinese. Okay, they start what's called the Opium War, which lasts for about 3 years. Um, and got to remember now at this point in time in history, Britain is extremely powerful, and they crush the Chinese. And they punish the Chinese, and what happens is China becomes open for business now with all Western countries. So if you think back to that political cartoon that's taken after the Opium Wars, where China now it really has no choice because Britain has set up basically a protectorate in China. Okay, the treaty that ends the war is called the Treaty of Nanjing. It struck in 1842. And what they did was the Chinese agreed to open 5 coastal ports to trade. They cut and very highly limited taxes on imported British goods, and the Chinese agreed to pay for all war expense. Um, Nothing at all was said in the treaty about the sale or importation of opium, which is really terms that are dictated by the British. So the opium trade continues, and really what happens is the citizenry of China becomes poisoned with this drug. Okay, just a term I want to cover with you guys. It's extraterritoriality, which really just means that the country is in possession. One country is in possession of another, but that country is allowed to keep all their local customs, governments, all that stuff. They use them for tax purposes, maybe for a port, all that. Best example of this is Hong Kong, which was a British possession for a very, very long time. And Hong Kong is simply an island off the coast of China. It's an independent country, as you can see here. If you look at this map, here's China as a whole. Okay, here's India. So if you blow up the map and just look at China, right, instead of the whole continent of Asia, and then you look at Hong Kong, which is an island down here in this group of islands, right here. So this island that you see right here is this one. Hong Kong is attached to that very small island, but a very integral part of China, very integral port. Hong Kong is given to Britain in the Treaty of Nanjing. Now, um, again, the British used Hong Kong as a port mainly to shuffle opium in and money out. Hong Kong continued to boom economically. It's a financial center, and it's one of the 8 largest economies in the world. And Britain eventually turned it over to the Hong Kong, excuse me, to the individuals there in the latter part of the last century, so the late 1900s. Now, if you look at two other countries in here, you have France and the United States. France really is competing with Britain, and they wanted to get a piece of that pie because of the resources and the ports and really the markets that are opened up. And the French take over Vietnam, and they set up a protectorate. Okay, that's being called French Indochina. Um, but a protectorate simply is somebody who depends on another country for their protection. So the France protected the Vietnamese, just another way of basically indirect colonization. The United States gets in the game when they acquire the Philippines in 1898 after the Spanish-American War. Um, and really, one of the reasons why they acquired it was they did not want the Philippines to fall into the hands of the Japanese. As the Japanese start to expand their area and really move their empire around too. So now you have the British in China, French in Vietnam. You have the Dutch in the southern area of this region, and the United States comes into play with the Philippines. Okay, let's stop there. We'll pick up with our last session on Africa here in a second. All right, guys. Thank you.